You've probably noticed one of our favorite things to make fun of in Gaio's Melody is the world building. It gets worse.
World building. Creating a fictional game universe. The places, people, and things in it, and how to make the player care for, love, and become totally immersed in your game's lore, citizens, and locations.
Great, so right off the bat she feels the need to explain to us what world building means. Yeah, this is gonna be fun.
Setting. Where does your game take place? Is it a mystical fantasy world full of castles and monsters?
Obviously, the setting is a foundation. You can't even have characters without some kind of background for them. Even someone that's never even written anything before is going to make a setting first, intentionally or not. It's just common sense.
Some people start with their stories when making games. Some start with a neat mechanic in mind. And I'm sure some even start with the kind of world and environment they want to show off.
I'm not really sure what your point is here in regard to world building, but yes, starting with a mechanic that sets it apart from others is perfectly fine, rather than starting with the story first.
As mentioned in my character creation video, for me, my starting point is always the characters. This is going to be their world. Usually, and quite comedically sometimes, you can throw your characters into any kind of world.
If they're flat and have no connection to anything, yeah, I guess you can. But a character that means anything is going to be connected to the world in some way. Let's use Kachi as an example. If you put her in a more mundane world without Kitsune, her entire tragic backstory is just gone, removing what little motivation she had.
When thinking about your game's setting, here are some things to think about. What kind of places will they live? What sort of people will they meet in your world? Where will they visit?
Your first and third points are the same, but yes, the world is important. I'm just struggling to see the point here. This is just repeating what you said earlier about making the setting first. And your second point here is basically just write characters other than the protagonist.
The kind of experience the player and the characters would get would be vastly different if they were, say, living in a war-infested medieval setting, compared to everyone's a happy high school student in modern-day Japan.
Obviously? God, I swear this whole video so far has just been, write a setting, that's important. Yeah, it is. It's also the most no-shit thing you could say. You just pointed out how stupid your earlier point was. Just a second ago, you said you can put characters in any world, and now you rightfully say that they will change drastically based on the world.
Backstory. Okay, so chances are, your game's world didn't just poof into existence the day the player started it. Unless it did, which would be interesting, but usually not the case. It's quite helpful to have an idea of what happened in your world's past, regardless of how much of it actually ends up in the game.
Not really. No, pointless backstory is pointless. If it doesn't serve a purpose, get rid of it.
This is incredibly helpful if your game's story happens to, say, rely on some myth or prophecy that happened X thousand years ago.
How is it even possible to write a story relying on a prophecy that you haven't even written? You might as well say, make sure to write crucial plot elements the story relies on.
Now, my games, the Gaio's Melody series, have a ton of world backstory. There's stuff about angels and demons fighting, races getting wiped out, multi-universe things, how places were even created. And want to know how much of this actually ended up in the first game?
Nothing at all, really. It's one of my favorite things to make fun of the game for.
Around one cutscene, where a whole 1 or 2 points get explained for plot-relevant reasons. Things are sprinkled here and there, but only the things relevant to the game's story and characters actually made it in.
Oh, right, sorry. Only what was important made it into the game. That's why the Usagi's summoning abilities that are crucial to events early in the game are never even explained, to the point that it's never even said if it's a racial ability or a cultural one. Well, what? And that shit ain't important?
Now the sequel, that one loved to throw in backstory, and it just kind of runs with it.
So pointless info dumps that add nothing. Both extremes are bad. If it doesn't explain anything relevant to what's going on, it's pointless. Pages upon pages of supernatural wars between angels or whatever else is filler. Unless it is tied into the story somehow that will actually be relevant to current situations. But you literally just admitted to it meaning nothing, so...
Creating my first game, I had ideas of what happened in the past, and why things were the way they were, but it wasn't necessary to go into further detail for it.
Yes, it was.
Since the past wasn't as much of a focus.
And here's where you show you have no idea what you're talking about. Since the past wasn't as much as a focus? just what? The past isn't a focus, it's how the past affects the present and the explanations for these things that's important, not the past itself.
As you work on your game, it's nice to keep in mind how the events of the past have affected how things are now.
Wait, so you are aware that this is the primary reason for a story's lore, and still stand by saying the past wasn't important for the first game?
The temple you worship, is there some reason you're there? Is there a reason it's there? You don't need to think of a reason or explanation for every little thing that occurs in your game, but it's helpful and quite fun to think of connections throughout your game and how things came to be.
This is the best thing you've ever said and ever will say. Unfortunately, you didn't follow your own advice when making your games.
It's even more interesting if you can do it in a way where you throw an interesting plot point past the player and give them a reason to figure out the connection themselves later, or the reasoning or context of why something is.
And then you took that good thought and pushed it aside as if it was a menial thing to make way for foreshadowing is good. God damn it.
Make everything significant.
This is actually a good point. Sometimes it can be easy to get carried away with side plots without realizing it's all kind of meaningless. Favorite quote of mine regarding this is, "A story isn't finished when there's nothing left to add, it's finished when there's nothing left to take away."
Every area in your world should have its own reason for being there, a reason it exists. Its own history, types of people, traditions, and in terms of gameplay, a reason the player characters would need to go there.
Oh, that's not what you meant at all. You meant give superficial backstories and reasons for us to be dragged through these places regardless that they couldn't be more detached from the story if you tried. Every time I say something positive about you, you just have to screw it up.
Make NPCs, the non-player characters that usually walk around randomly in towns.
Did you just explain to us what NPC means? How stupid do you think your audience is?
Characters are real, and NPCs are no exception.
Yes, you do need to respect your world and characters if you want anyone else to. Treat them as if they were real. That mindset will help you be invested in your own story and care about your cast. But you just said something good, so let's see how you ruin it.
You can make them have lives, instead of the NPC that gives you generic information like, something strange is happening at North Mountain. Add some character into it, like, something strange is happening at that darn mountain again. But we can do better. What about, something strange is happening at that darn mountain again. That poison smoke's been ruining my crops!
Well, that didn't take long. Wanting to develop side characters is all well and good, but it's not far enough. That's all you're doing, developing side characters. You're taking a normal bland event and giving it flavor. Underneath it's still the same boring event. However, if you develop a character and then let the events come naturally from them, they'll be far more dynamic and interesting than what you're doing, a cliche with a nice face.
I like to ask myself, does this line show characterization? Does this line help progress the plot? Does this line establish more of the world? Is this line so darn funny it just needs to be there? If I read this in a game, would I feel like it was worth being there?
Yeah, I agree. Every line of dialogue should matter. This is just what I said earlier, really. But like every other good thing you've said, you didn't actually follow through when you had the chance.
Avoid making every area look and feel the same way. Each area should bring something new to the player.
This is a good, if obvious, point, but you know an even better way to keep people invested? Giving us an actual reason for being there.
Talk about your world in-game. Don't be afraid to introduce things the player has never heard of.
Actually, don't. Nothing breaks immersion faster than characters acting as if they're from our world. If something is normal for them, they shouldn't address it oddly, and in most cases shouldn't address it at all, since the only reason for them talking about it is to inform the player.
Make things pretty. Okay, don't feel obligated to be crazy like me and want to do every little graphic yourself.
I'm just gonna skip this whole section. It's just her kissing her own ass about how much work she put in and how pretty the game is.
But think of your game as its own real life. Obviously there are limitations because, well, it is a game. But characters are people. They have likes, dislikes, fears, and life stories. Towns are places. They look and feel different, and are created throughout years and years of history.
I'm just gonna stop you right there. You're repeating yourself, so I already went over this. Yes, having this respect towards your work is necessary, but you don't follow through.
Make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments.
Is an angry response video acceptable?